3 a.m. break-in changed everything. I caught our HOA president inside my house with copied keys, thinking she could intimidate a widowed construction worker. But Laura Evans made one fatal mistake. She had no clue my son had just returned home after years away. What happened when this entitled Karen discovered what kind of family she was really messing with? The confrontation that followed shocked our entire neighborhood and became the most talked about HOA drama in county history. Some battles you think you can win until you realize who you're actually fighting. Comment where you're watching from because this story will make you think twice about every neighbor you've ever trusted. 5 years. That's how long I'd been struggling to keep my head above water since my wife Linda died in that car accident. You know how it is when you lose your partner. Suddenly you're doing the job of 2 people. And let me tell you, homeowner maintenance was definitely Linda's department. I'm good with concrete and rebar, but HOA regulations, that stuff might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Every month, I'd get these violation notices that made my blood pressure spike higher than a construction crane. Mailbox height is non-compliant by 2 inches. Unauthorized rose bush varieties detected. Fence stain color deviation from approved pallet. Each notice came with threats of $500 daily fines. And on a construction foreman's salary. That kind of money could break me. That's when Laura Evans showed up at my door with her Oscar-worthy performance. Picture this. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a designer blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and a clipboard that screamed official business. But it was the fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies, and that sympathetic smile that really sold the act. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I've been watching you struggle since Linda passed. I know how overwhelming all these regulations can be for someone in your situation. Someone in my situation. I should have caught that condescending tone right there, but grief and desperation make you stupid." She introduced herself as the HOA president and claimed she was there to help me navigate the complex compliance requirements that were apparently threatening my home. Looking back now, I can see exactly what she was doing. Laura had her system down to a science. Target the vulnerable, offer salvation, then strike when they're completely dependent on your help. She started by validating my confusion about the violations, making me feel like I wasn't crazy for thinking they were unreasonable. "These regulations are deliberately confusing," she explained, "designed to trap homeowners who don't understand the system." Then came the lifeline. She could personally guide me through a pre-compliance inspection that would save me thousands in potential penalties. All I had to do was sign a simple consent form giving her access to coordinate the process. The clipboard came out, official HOA letterhead gleaming, and I was reaching for my pen like a drowning man grabbing a rope. That's when my son Marcus walked through the front door, still in his dress uniform from the VA appointment he had just finished. The way he immediately assessed the situation, scanning Laura's clipboard, noting her expensive car, observing her body language, told me his military training was kicking in even before he said a word. The way he carried himself, the way his eyes immediately scanned the situation and locked onto Laura like a targeting system. The way his voice cut through her sweet talking with military precision. "Dad, step away from those documents." I'd seen Marcus in uniform before, obviously, but this was different. This was my son switching into full command mode, and suddenly I realized that the helpless widow act Laura was peddling didn't account for the fact that this family had produced a United States Marine. Laura's confident smile flickered for just a moment when Marcus reached for her paperwork. "Oh, that's really not necessary," she said quickly. "Your father and I have everything handled." But Marcus was already reading, and I could see his jaw tighten with each line. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying that unmistakable authority that comes from leading troops in combat zones. "These authorization forms contain legal language granting unlimited property access. Cite the specific municipal code that requires this level of homeowner compliance." The way she stammered and backpedaled was beautiful to watch. Suddenly, all her confident explanations became vague references to standard procedures and coordinating with city officials. When Marcus pulled out his phone and offered to call the city building department to verify her claims about emergency safety inspections, I watched Laura Evans panic in real time. But here's where it gets interesting and where I should have realized this woman was more dangerous than your average HOA busybody. Instead of retreating when caught in her lies, Laura doubled down. She started playing the victim card, talking about how difficult it was to help people who didn't appreciate her efforts, how she was just trying to save me from legal trouble. The performance was so convincing that I actually felt guilty for questioning her motives. That's the mark of a true predator. They make you feel bad for protecting yourself. Marcus wasn't buying it for a second, though. He measured the fence setback with a Militera laser level and proved her violation claim was off by 3 and 1/2 in. When he forced her to sign a corrected measurement report with Mrs. Cooper from next door as a witness, Laura's confident facade cracked just enough to show the fury underneath. The moment that should have been my first real warning came as Laura was leaving. She made this mysterious phone call while sitting in her expensive SUV right outside my house. And Marcus, with his training and reading body language and interpreting threats, could tell something was seriously wrong. I was still stuck in that grateful mindset, thinking maybe she really was trying to help and I just embarrassed her with my suspicious son. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "that woman isn't here to help anyone. She's here to take our house." I wanted to believe he was being paranoid, that his military training was making him see enemies where there were just neighbors. Laura sat in her car for nearly 10 minutes, gesturing angrily as she spoke to someone on the phone. Whatever conversation she was having, it was about us. And from her body language, it wasn't good news. The cookies she'd brought were still warm on my kitchen counter when Marcus pulled me aside for a serious conversation. "Dad, I need you to listen to me carefully. That woman spent the entire time here asking questions that had nothing to do with HOA compliance. She wanted to know your work schedule, when you're home alone, and whether you have security systems. She was chasing this place like a target." He showed me the corrected measurement she'd been forced to sign, pointing out how her handwriting got shaky when she realized she'd been caught in a lie. "Professional scam artists don't usually lose their composure that easily," he explained. "She's either new at this or she's desperate. Either way, that makes her dangerous." I stood there holding those damn cookies, feeling like the biggest fool in the world, finally understanding that my son's paranoia might actually be keeping us alive. But as I watched Laura make that phone call, I couldn't shake one terrifying question. Who was she really calling? And what was she planning to do to my family next? The next morning brought a legitimate city building inspector to my door, and I thought maybe I'd been wrong about Laura after all. The guy was professional, had proper credentials, and seemed to know what he was talking about when he explained the routine safety inspection that the HOA had coordinated for older homes in our neighborhood. I felt like an idiot for doubting Laura's intentions, until I realized this was exactly what she'd been planning all along. She showed up 20 minutes after the inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, playing the helpful HOA coordinator role to perfection. "I'll hold your keys while you show him the electrical panel in the basement," she offered with that same synthetic smile. These inspections can be confusing, and I know exactly what the city requires for compliance documentation. Looking back, I can see how perfectly she'd orchestrated the whole thing. The inspection was legitimate. She'd used her actual authority as HA president to schedule it through proper channels. The inspector was real. The paperwork was official, and everything appeared completely above board. But while I was downstairs pointing out circuit breakers and explaining our home's electrical history, Laura was upstairs with my house keys, pressing them into some kind of molding compound she'd hidden in that professional-look clipboard. Marcus was at work on a construction site across town, but those security cameras he'd insisted on installing were recording everything. When I watched that footage later, seeing Laura's careful, practiced movements as she copied our keys, I realized this woman had done this before multiple times. The inspector finished his work, filed his report, and left with genuine satisfaction about our home's safety compliance. Laura lingered just long enough to establish the perfect alibi. She'd been present during an official city inspection, helping a confused widower navigate bureaucratic requirements. Anyone reviewing the paperwork would see a helpful HOA president doing her job. What they wouldn't see was the criminal conspiracy she'd just executed with military precision. That evening, while I was feeling grateful for Laura's assistance and proud that our house had passed inspection, she was already planning her first illegal entry using those copied keys. 2 days later, I came home from work to find subtle signs that someone had been in my house. Tools in my garage were moved slightly. Papers on my desk weren't quite where I'd left them. And there was this feeling, the one that your personal space had been violated. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, influenced by Marcus' suspicious nature. But when I called him at work and described what I was seeing, he immediately accessed our security cameras through his smartphone app and confirmed my worst fears. The footage showed Laura entering our house at 1:15 in the afternoon using our own keys like she owned the place. Watching that video was like getting punched in the stomach. There she was, the woman I'd trusted to help me navigate HOA regulations, systematically violating every boundary of human decency. She wasn't just looking around. She was actively sabotaging our home, loosening a handrail here, creating what looked like electrical hazards there, taking professional quality photos of every fake violation she created. The calculated nature of it was what really got to me. This wasn't some crime of opportunity or moment of desperation. This was a business model. She had a system, a process for turning homeowners into victims. And I'd walked right into her trap like a lamb to slaughter. When Marcus got home that night, he didn't waste time on "I told you so" lectures. Instead, he immediately shifted into tactical mode, treating our situation like the security threat it had become. "Dad, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here," he said, pulling up county records on his laptop with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of gathering intelligence in hostile territory. What we discovered painted a picture of financial desperation that made Laura's criminal behavior suddenly make terrible sense. Her house was in foreclosure with only 19 days remaining before auction. Medical liens from County General Hospital showed cancer treatment bills totaling $127,000. Most telling of all, divorce papers filed just 2 weeks earlier cited financial fraud as grounds for dissolution of marriage. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Laura wasn't just some power-hungry HOA president abusing her authority for kicks. She was a woman facing complete financial destruction, and our home represented her only chance at survival. The property values in our neighborhood had skyrocketed over the past 2 years, and our corner lot was worth every bit of $350,000. If she could force us to sell at a distressed price, say $180,000 to avoid legal troubles and mounting violations, she could flip it for enough profit to save herself from bankruptcy and homelessness. It was actually a brilliant plan in a sociopathic sort of way: target vulnerable families, manufacture crisis, and offer solutions that benefit only herself. Marcus spent an hour researching the proper legal format for a no trespass notice. "We need to make this official," he explained, typing carefully. "From now on, if she comes near our property, it's a crime." Then he did something that showed just how seriously he was taking this threat. He changed every lock in our house that same night. "Dad, from now on, every interaction with that woman gets documented. We're building a case that's going to destroy her in court, but we need to be smarter than she is." The military precision with which he approached our defense gave me confidence for the first time since this nightmare began. The next morning brought a phone call that confirmed everything Marcus had predicted about Laura's true nature. 2 days later, I got a follow-up call that made everything click into place. The inspector mentioned that Laura had asked him specifically about our work schedules and security setup, questions that had nothing to do with building safety. "The HOA president seemed very interested in your keys," he explained. "She asked unusual questions about your work schedule and seemed to be paying more attention to your security setup than the actual safety compliance issues. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and that kind of behavior raises red flags." When I told him about the copied keys and illegal entry, his response was immediate. "Mr. Harris, you need to file a police report right now. What you're describing is a pattern I've seen before." That afternoon, Laura received Marcus' no trespass notice and responded exactly the way we'd expected, with escalating threats and legal intimidation. Her phone call was a masterpiece of manipulation, alternating between victim playing and aggressive posturing. "That notice is illegal harassment of an elected HOA official," she screamed. "I have emergency access authority granted by city ordinance, and your son's military intimidation tactics won't work on me." When I calmly explained that she'd stolen our keys and broken into our house, her mask slipped completely. "I have legal access to ensure compliance." You'll regret crossing me." The fury in her voice, the entitled rage at being challenged, told us everything we needed to know about what kind of person we were really dealing with. But when Marcus showed me the security footage of Laura copying our keys, I realized we were in serious danger. But what we discovered the next morning made me wonder, how long had she been watching us? And what else had she already done that we didn't know about? The answer to my question came in the form of an overnight FedEx delivery that arrived at 6 o'clock in the morning, 3 days after we'd sent Laura that no trespass notice. Inside was a professionally formatted document titled Emergency Access Authorization bearing what appeared to be my signature on official HOA letterhead. The problem? I'd never signed any such document, and Laura had screwed up in the most amateur way possible. She'd forged my middle initial as Michael instead of Mitchell. It's funny how criminals always trip themselves up on the small details. Marcus studied that signature with the same intensity he'd once used to analyze enemy communications, documenting every inconsistency with forensic precision. The pen pressure was wrong. The letter spacing was off. And most damning of all, the date showed it was supposedly signed during the building inspection when I'd been in the basement the entire time. "Dad, this isn't just fraud," Marcus explained, photographing the document from multiple angles for evidence. "This is a systematic criminal conspiracy. She's creating a paper trail to justify her illegal activities after the fact." And he pulled out my mortgage documents to compare signatures. And the differences were so obvious that even I could see them. The woman who had seemed so professional and competent had made the kind of mistake that first-year law students learn to avoid. But what really chilled me was the realization that this forged authorization was probably just the beginning. If she was willing to commit felony fraud to justify her break-ins, what other crimes was she planning to pin on us? The next few days brought a cascade of escalating harassment that showed just how desperate Laura was becoming. Official-looking letters arrived daily, each one claiming new violations and threatening increasingly severe penalties. Notice of intent to fine, 48-hour compliance period, or legal action will commence. Property condemnation warning. Structural violations detected during emergency inspection. The language was designed to terrorize me into submission. And I'll admit it was working. Even knowing these documents were fraudulent, the constant stream of legal threats was wearing me down. I started second-guessing every decision, wondering if maybe I should just sell the house and move somewhere simpler, somewhere without HOA presidents who turned property management into psychological warfare. But Marcus' investigation into Laura's background revealed something that changed everything. We weren't her first victims. County records showed a disturbing pattern over the past 2 years. 3 other families in nearby neighborhoods had sold their homes at below-market prices after being hit with identical harassment campaigns. The Johnson family, where the husband was a Marine veteran struggling with PTSD. The Williams family, where the elderly father was still fighting $12,000 in fake violation fines. The Patterson family, where Laura had tried to copy keys during a fake water meter inspection. Every victim fit the same profile. Vulnerable families with properties she wanted, systematically destroyed through manufactured crisis until they either sold cheaply or fled entirely. The most sickening discovery was that Laura had been specifically targeting military families. Marcus found social media posts where she'd researched veterans' disability benefits, their family situations, and their financial vulnerabilities. She'd turned preying on the people who had served our country into a profitable business model. "Dad, she didn't just randomly pick us," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of cold anger I'd only heard when he talked about enemy combatants overseas. "She studied us. She knew about Mom's death, my deployments, and your financial struggles. This woman weaponized our grief and service against us." The calculated cruelty of it made me want to drive over to her house and have the kind of conversation that would definitely violate my son's carefully planned legal strategy. That's when Laura made her next move, recruiting an accomplice for what she clearly intended to be the final phase of her operation. Her nephew Jake, a 20-year-old college student desperate for tuition money, got a sob story about his dying aunt fighting cancer while being harassed by an unstable veteran. Laura promised him $5,000 from her house sale commission if he'd help with one final inspection to document safety violations. The kid was reluctant but broke, and Laura played every emotional manipulation card in her deck. She even showed him fake medical records and painted pictures of me as a dangerous veteran who needed to be stopped before I hurt someone in the neighborhood. What Laura didn't know was that Jake was smarter than she gave him credit for. Something about the whole situation felt wrong to him, especially when she started talking about planting evidence to make the violations more obvious for the inspectors. When she handed him a bag of what looked suspiciously like illegal drugs and told him they needed to document substance abuse in the household, Jake realized his aunt wasn't asking him to help with safety inspections. She was asking him to help frame an innocent family. Instead of going along with her plan, he did something that probably saved all our lives. He secretly recorded their conversation and then reached out to Marcus through a veteran support group online. The recording Jake provided was devastating evidence of Laura's criminal intent. We could hear her voice clear as day explaining how to plant methamphetamine in my military gear to make it look like PTSD drug abuse. She discussed stolen Vietnam War medals from other veteran families that would make the framing more believable and even mentioned forged court documents that would confuse police response by making it appear I was already under investigation. The level of premeditation was staggering. This woman had planned every detail of our destruction, right down to the specific drugs she'd used to destroy my son's military career and reputation. Marcus listened to that recording with the kind of focused intensity I'd seen him use when studying enemy positions before a mission. "Dad, she just made a fatal tactical error," he said finally. "She assumed her nephew would be loyal no matter what, and she documented her own criminal conspiracy. We now have evidence of intent to commit federal crimes against a military family." He immediately contacted Jake directly, offering him immunity and protection in exchange for full cooperation with law enforcement. The kid was terrified, but willing to do the right thing, especially after Marcus explained that what his aunt was planning wasn't just fraud. It was attempted destruction of lives and careers that had been built through military service and sacrifice. But the most chilling part of Jake's testimony was what he revealed about Laura's timeline. She'd given herself a deadline of exactly 1 week to complete our destruction because that's when the foreclosure auction was scheduled for her own home. If she couldn't force us to sell and generate the cash she needed, she'd lose everything anyway. This meant we were dealing with a woman who had literally nothing left to lose, and that made her infinitely more dangerous than some petty hoe tyrant. A person facing complete destruction will take risks that rational criminals would never consider. That night, as I sat in my living room, knowing that somewhere across town, a desperate woman was planning to destroy my family with planted drugs and forged evidence, I realized this situation had moved far beyond anything I could handle on my own. But I also realized something else. I'd raised a son who had the skills and determination to outmaneuver even the most cunning enemy. Marcus was already 3 steps ahead of Laura's plan, and I was starting to understand that this war wasn't going to end with our defeat. Finding out Laura had cancer should have made me feel sorry for her. Instead, it made me terrified. Because if a dying woman was this desperate to steal our home, what line wouldn't she cross to get it? Tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted someone who turned out to be completely different than they seemed? How did you figure out the truth? Laura's next move proved that Marcus had been right about her desperation making her dangerous. Instead of backing down after we documented her crimes, she decided to wage war on our reputation through the neighborhood's online community group. Her posts were masterpieces of manipulation designed to turn every neighbor against us by exploiting the worst stereotypes about veterans and military families. Dangerous veteran threatens peaceful residents with military intimidation tactics. Read her first post, accompanied by doctored photos showing alleged property damage that she claimed Marcus had caused in retaliation for her legitimate HOA enforcement activities. The images looked convincing at first glance. Broken fence boards, damaged mailboxes, spray paint on her garage door, but Marcus trained I immediately spotted the digital manipulation. What really got under my skin was how she weaponized her cancer diagnosis to gain sympathy while painting my son as an unstable threat to the community. "I'm fighting for my life against this terrible disease," she wrote. "And now I have to live in fear because this PTSD veteran can't handle normal neighborhood rules." The community response was swift and decisive once people saw the actual evidence instead of Laura's emotional manipulation. Mrs. Cooper immediately posted her own account of witnessing Laura's harassment tactics, and suddenly other neighbors started coming forward with their own stories. The Patterson family shared how Laura had tried to copy their keys during a fake inspection. A veteran family from 2 streets over described receiving similar harassment until they had been forced to sell and move. The Johnson family even joined the online discussion from their new home across town, detailing exactly how Laura's systematic campaign had destroyed their finances and forced them into bankruptcy. But the real turning point came when Laura's husband, Richard, made his own post announcing their divorce proceedings. "I cannot be associated with criminal fraud activities," he wrote in a statement that must have been cleared by his attorney. "I am cooperating fully with law enforcement investigations and have no knowledge of the illegal activities described in these posts. I am filing for divorce with fraud allegations and request that the community direct all future communications through my legal counsel." And watching Laura's own husband abandon her publicly was brutal, but it also confirmed what we'd suspected. Even the people closest to her couldn't defend her actions when the evidence was laid out clearly. That's when Laura made her most desperate move yet, filing a false police report, claiming Marcus had threatened her with violence and demanding an immediate restraining order. She even provided what she claimed was audio evidence of threats. But when the responding officer asked Marcus to provide counter-evidence, the truth became obvious immediately. Marcus played the original audio from his security system, proving that Laura's evidence had been edited to remove context and add threatening language that had never been spoken. The officer's response was swift and professional. "Ma'am, filing false reports is a serious felony. You need to understand the legal consequences of wasting police resources with fraudulent claims." The attempted restraining order backfired spectacularly when it triggered a more thorough police investigation into Laura's activities. Suddenly, we had law enforcement taking statements from all her previous victims, documenting a clear pattern of harassment and fraud targeting vulnerable families. The city inspector, who had unknowingly facilitated her key copying scheme, came forward with his own testimony about her suspicious behavior during the inspection. Even the locksmith she'd approached about emergency HOA access contacted police to report that they had been deceived about her authority and intentions. Meanwhile, Marcus had been building relationships with the local veteran community, and word about Laura's targeting of military families spread quickly through informal networks. The VFW chapter started showing up at our house to offer support. And suddenly, Laura found herself facing not just one Marine family, but an entire community of veterans who took attacks on their brothers personally. Staff Sergeant Harris represents the finest values of American military service. Their spokesman announced at the next HOA board meeting, "Any assault on his character is an assault on all of us." The sight of 20 veterans in uniform standing behind Marcus during that meeting made it crystal clear that Laura had picked the wrong fight with the wrong family. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when we discovered security footage from a neighbor's camera that captured Laura having a complete breakdown in her car after one of the community meetings. She was screaming into her phone about how unfair everything was, how she deserved better than some construction worker's family, and how she'd make us pay for ruining her plans. The raw entitlement and fury in her voice, stripped of all the fake sympathy and professional courtesy, showed everyone exactly who they were really dealing with. When that video started circulating through the community, even her few remaining supporters quietly disappeared. The final blow to Laura's credibility came when an anonymous neighbor leaked photos of foreclosure notices posted on her door along with medical bills that showed her cancer treatment had actually been completed successfully months earlier. Her sob story about fighting for her life while being harassed by unstable veterans was revealed as just another layer of manipulation in her systematic fraud campaign. The community realized they'd been played by a professional con artist who'd exploited their natural sympathy for cancer patients to cover up her criminal activities. As the HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting to address the situation, Laura made one final attempt to control the narrative by scheduling a private meeting with board members to present what she called the full truth about the Harris family threat. She was planning to make one last play for community support, using every manipulation tactic in her arsenal to convince people that she was the real victim in this situation. But she didn't know that Marcus had spent the week building an airtight case that would expose every one of her lies in front of the entire neighborhood. Watching Laura break down in her car while screaming into that phone, I started to wonder, was her cancer diagnosis even real, or was that just another lie? And if she was faking a terminal illness, what else was she lying about? The night before the community meeting, Laura made her most desperate and stupid decision yet. She decided to execute her evidence-planting operation regardless of the risks because she knew the next day would either save her reputation or destroy it completely. Jake had already confessed everything to us and agreed to cooperate with the police. But Laura didn't know that yet. In her mind, she still had a loyal accomplice and one final chance to frame us before the community meeting exposed her crimes. The plan was simple in its criminal audacity. Break into our house at 2:47 in the morning, plant methamphetamine in Marcus military gear, arrange stolen Vietnam War medals to suggest stolen valor, and have Jake call police with an anonymous tip about suspicious veteran drug activity that would result in our arrest just hours before the meeting. Marcus had predicted this exact scenario, and he'd been preparing for it like a military operation for 3 days. He'd positioned himself in our living room with night vision equipment, maintaining a vigilant watch while I tried to sleep upstairs, knowing that Laura's desperation would eventually force her to make a move that would destroy her completely. Mrs. Cooper was stationed at her front window with instructions to call 911 the moment she saw anyone approaching our property. The trap was set perfectly, and all we had to do was wait for Laura's criminal arrogance to walk right into it. At exactly 2:47 a.m., our motion sensors detected movement in the backyard, and Marcus' phone buzzed with alerts from our security system. Through the cameras, we could see Laura and Jake approaching the house with military-style duffel bags, moving like amateur burglars who'd watched too many heist movies. Laura tried her copied keys first, discovered that we'd changed the locks, and flew into a rage that was clearly visible even through night vision. That bastard thinks he's so smart. She hissed loud enough for our audio equipment to pick up clearly. Fine, we'll do this the hard way. She then proceeded to force our garage window open with a crowbar, committing clear breaking and entering, while Jake stood there looking increasingly terrified. The contents of Laura's bag were even more damaging than we'd expected. Along with the methamphetamine and stolen military medals Jake had warned us about, she'd brought forged court documents designed to make it appear that Marcus was already under federal investigation for drug trafficking. There were fake DEA seizure notices, manufactured evidence bags with official-looking labels, and even a planted cell phone loaded with text messages that would suggest drug dealing activity. The level of premeditation was staggering. This woman had planned every detail of our destruction down to creating an entire false criminal history that would have been convincing enough to fool a casual investigation. But the most chilling evidence was a handwritten note we found later detailing Laura's timeline for the operation. She'd planned to have us arrested by 4 a.m., giving her time to spread the news through community channels before the evening meeting. By the time neighbors gathered to discuss her harassment allegations, we'd be sitting in jail on federal drug charges, and she'd be free to spin whatever narrative she wanted about dangerous veterans who had finally been exposed as the criminals she'd always claimed we were. It was actually a brilliant plan. If you ignore the moral depravity and criminal conspiracy that made it possible, Jake's breakdown when he realized what his aunt was actually doing provided us with the most damaging testimony we could have hoped for. As soon as Laura started arranging drugs in Marcus' military footlocker, Jake began crying and confessing everything. "Aunt Laura, this is definitely illegal. You told me we were just documenting safety violations." And he pulled out his phone and started recording her response, which was a furious admission of criminal intent that no lawyer would ever be able to explain away. "Shut up and help me plant this stuff," Laura screamed. "We need evidence serious enough to destroy his military career and get him arrested before that meeting tomorrow." Marcus waited until Laura had fully committed to the crime before making his move. When the lights suddenly blazed on throughout the house, Laura dropped her evidence bag in shock, spilling cocaine and stolen medals across our living room floor. Marcus emerged from the shadows in full tactical gear, his night vision equipment giving him an otherworldly appearance that clearly terrified Laura into total compliance. "Ma'am, you are trespassing in a federal contractor's residence," he announced in his commanding officer voice. "Remain where you The police response was swift and professional, with multiple officers arriving to find Laura standing in our living room surrounded by planted evidence and criminal tools, while Jake sobbed out confessions that implicated her in systematic fraud targeting military families. The lead officer recognized the situation immediately. This wasn't a domestic dispute or neighborhood argument, but a serious federal crime involving drugs, stolen military property, and conspiracy to frame a decorated veteran. Laura's arrest was captured on body cameras from multiple angles, including her screaming threats about how we'd regret this and how she'd make sure everyone knows what kind of criminals we really were. But the most satisfying moment came when the arresting officer informed Laura that Jake had been cooperating with us for days, providing evidence and recordings that documented her entire criminal conspiracy. The look of betrayal and rage on her face when she realized that her own nephew had turned against her was absolutely priceless. "You little traitor!" she screamed at Jake as they loaded her into the police car. "I was trying to save us both. That house should have been ours." The entitled fury, the complete inability to accept responsibility for her actions, showed everyone exactly what kind of person had been terrorizing our neighborhood. The evidence inventory that the police conducted at the scene read like something from a major federal drug case. Planted methamphetamine with a street value exceeding $5,000. Stolen military medals from at least 3 different families. Forged federal court documents bearing fake day seals. Professional burglary tools, including lockpicks and electronic surveillance equipment. The scope of Laura's criminal operation was so extensive that federal authorities immediately took jurisdiction, elevating her charges from simple breaking and entering to conspiracy to commit federal crimes against military personnel. As they loaded Laura into the police car, she looked back at our house with such pure hatred that it chilled me to the bone. Even caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence of her crimes, even facing federal charges that could put her in prison for decades, she was still focused on destroying us rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. But she also looked like someone who knew her life was over. And that made me wonder what kind of desperate moves she might try to make, even from behind bars. Seeing Laura in handcuffs should have been the end of our nightmare. But as they loaded her into the police car, she looked back at our house with such pure hatred that I couldn't help wondering, even from jail, could she still find a way to hurt us? The community meeting that evening became something none of us could have anticipated. A packed courtroom where 73 neighbors gathered to witness Laura's complete destruction in front of everyone she'd been trying to manipulate for months. The community center hadn't seen that kind of turnout since the hurricane evacuation meetings, and you could feel the electric tension in the air as people who'd been following the neighborhood drama online finally got to see the evidence presented in person. Even a local news crew showed up after hearing about the morning's arrest, turning what should have been a routine HOA discussion into a public spectacle that would define our community for years to come. Marcus had prepared for this moment like a military briefing, with a systematic presentation that laid out Laura's crimes in chronological order with supporting evidence that made denial impossible. He started with a timeline of her initial approach and escalated through each phase of harassment, forgery, breaking and entering, and finally attempted framing with planted drugs. The Ring doorbell footage of her copying our keys during the inspection played on the Community Sense big screen, followed by security video of her illegal entries and the audio recordings Jake had provided of her planning to destroy our family. Watching our neighbors' faces as they realized the scope of Laura's deception was incredibly satisfying. You could see the exact moment when each person understood they'd been manipulated by a master con artist. The most powerful testimony came from Laura's previous victims, who attended the meeting to ensure that the full scope of her criminal activities was understood by everyone present. The Johnson family spoke about losing their home and going into bankruptcy after Laura's systematic harassment campaign. The Williams family detailed how they were still fighting $12,000 in fraudulent fines that Laura had manufactured through forged documents. Mrs. Patterson described the fake water meter inspection where Laura had attempted to copy their keys and how they had only avoided our fate by having security cameras that caught her in the act. Each testimony built on the others, creating an overwhelming picture of predatory behavior that had been targeting our neighborhood for years. But the most shocking moment came when the city building inspector arrived unexpectedly to provide live testimony about Laura's suspicious behavior during our legitimate inspection. He brought his official report and documentation showing how Laura had asked unusual questions about our work schedule and security arrangements that had nothing to do with safety compliance. She specifically asked when Mr. Harris would be at work alone. He testified, "In 15 years of conducting inspections, I've never had an HOA president show that kind of interest in a homeowner's personal schedule." I now realize she was planning illegal entry using the inspection as cover for her criminal activities. The community's response was swift and decisive once they understood the full scope of Laura's betrayal. Person after person stood up to express outrage, not just at her crimes, but at how she'd manipulated their trust and sympathy to cover up her criminal activities. The cancer diagnosis that had generated so much community support was revealed to be another layer of manipulation. Medical records showed her treatment had been successfully completed months earlier, and she'd been using her recovery period to plan and execute her fraud campaign against military families. The fake vulnerability, the soba stories about fighting for her life while being harassed by dangerous veterans had all been calculated lies designed to turn the community against us. Mrs. Cooper received a standing ovation when she stood up to describe how she'd witnessed Laura's harassment tactics and chosen to support our family despite the social pressure to believe Laura's lies. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, she said with quiet dignity. "And I've never seen anything as disgusting as a woman who would exploit cancer sympathy to cover up crimes against veterans who served our country. Laura Evans is a disgrace to everything our community stands for." Her words carried special weight because everyone knew she was a cancer survivor herself, and her condemnation of Laura's manipulation hit with devastating moral authority. The formal HOA business was concluded quickly and unanimously. Laura was removed from all positions effective immediately, with her access to official letterhead and authority revoked permanently. All violation notices and fines she'd issued over the past 2 years were declared null and void, with the board promising to review every case for potential fraud. New policies were established requiring board majority votes for any enforcement actions, written consent for property access, and monthly transparency meetings with full financial disclosure. The Harris Protocol became official HOA policy, ensuring that no future resident could be victimized by the kind of systematic abuse Laura had perfected. The veteran community's response was particularly moving, with representatives from 3 different VFW chapters attending to show support for Marcus and condemn Laura's targeting of military families. Staff Sergeant Harris represents the finest values of American military service. Their spokesman announced, "The fact that someone would exploit veteran stereotypes and PTSD stigma to cover up criminal activities is not just an attack on one family. It's an attack on everyone who has served our country in uniform." They presented Marcus with a Community Service Award and announced the establishment of a Veteran Family Support Network to prevent future targeting of military households. But the most devastating blow to Laura's reputation came through a video call connection to the county jail, where she was forced to participate in the meeting as part of her bail conditions. Seeing her in orange jail clothes without makeup or professional styling stripped away the last vestiges of the authoritative HA presidenta she'd used to manipulate everyone for so long. When the board chair asked if she had anything to say in her defense, Laura broke down completely, crying hysterically as she begged the community for forgiveness and claimed she'd only been trying to save her home and family from financial destruction. "I just needed the money," she sobbed, destroying any remaining sympathy people might have felt for her situation. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. That house should have been enough to save everything." The entitled assumption that our home existed for her benefit, even in her moment of supposed remorse, showed everyone exactly what kind of person they'd been dealing with. There was no real apology, no acceptance of responsibility for the trauma she'd inflicted on multiple families. Just self-pity and continued justification for criminal behavior that had devastated lives and destroyed trust throughout our entire community. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval of criminal referrals to federal authorities and a community fund to help Laura's victims recover legal expenses and damaged property. But as people filed out of the community center talking excitedly about finally getting justice for years of harassment and manipulation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't heard the last from Laura Evans. Even facing federal charges and community exile, she still had that look of someone who blamed everyone except herself for her situation. After everything Laura had put us through, watching her public breakdown felt like justice. But when the city building inspector pulled me aside after the meeting, his question made my blood run cold. "Mr. Harris, did you know Laura Evans wasn't actually sick? Drop a comment if you've ever been to a neighborhood meeting that got this crazy. What's the wildest HOA drama you've ever witnessed?" Chapter 7. Perfect Revenge. 1,500 words. The building inspector's revelation about Laura's fake cancer diagnosis was just the beginning of discoveries that would completely destroy whatever remained of her credibility and reputation. As federal investigators dug deeper into her activities, they uncovered a sophisticated fraud operation that went far beyond our neighborhood harassment campaign. Laura had been filing false insurance claims for years, using her HOA position to access homes and stage accidents that generated thousands of dollars in fraudulent payouts. She'd been running fake charity drives for her cancer treatment, soliciting donations from community members and church groups while secretly using the money to pay gambling debts and maintain her expensive lifestyle. The scope of her deception was staggering. Investigators found evidence of at least 15 separate fraud schemes operating simultaneously across 3 counties. The federal prosecution moved swiftly once they understood the scope of Laura's criminal enterprise. The district attorney filed 8 felony charges, including breaking and entering, fraud, false reporting, evidence tampering, forgery, insurance fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit federal crimes against military personnel. Jake's immunity testimony provided detailed evidence of her systematic targeting of veteran families, while financial records revealed a pattern of predatory behavior spanning 3 years and involving at least 7 families across 2 counties. Her court-appointed public defender assigned due to her complete bankruptcy status advised her to accept a plea deal rather than face trial with overwhelming evidence and victim testimony that would likely result in decades in federal prison. But Laura's arrogance and entitlement ran so deep that she actually rejected the initial plea offer. Convinced that she could manipulate a jury the same way she'd manipulated our community for years, her decision to go to trial became the final act of hubris that sealed her complete destruction. The prosecution presented 47 pieces of evidence, including video footage, audio recordings, forged documents, financial records, and testimony from 11 victims spanning multiple years. Marcus testified for 3 hours, methodically dismantling every lie Laura had told and every excuse her defense attorney tried to present. When they played the recording of Laura instructing Jake to plant drugs in our home, you could see the jury's faces change from skepticism to disgust in real time. The most satisfying justice came through the civil consequences that destroyed Laura's life even more thoroughly than criminal penalties ever could. Her foreclosure proceeded on schedule with the house she'd been so desperate to save auctioned off to the highest bidder after 30 days of legal notices. The irony was absolutely perfect. I attended that auction with funds raised by our community support network. And I bought Laura's former home for $185,000, the exact amount she'd planned to force us to sell for. Walking through the house where she'd planned our destruction, seeing the expensive furniture and luxury items she'd accumulated through years of fraud, gave me a sense of poetic justice that no court verdict could have provided. The master bedroom, where she'd probably plotted against our family, became Marcus' new home office, where he now helps other fraud victims fight back against predators. Laura's sentencing became a community event that drew over 100 people to the federal courthouse, including victims from multiple neighborhoods who wanted to witness the final chapter of her criminal career. The Johnson family described losing their home and filing bankruptcy after Laura's harassment campaign destroyed their finances and mental health. The Williams family detailed ongoing medical bills for stress-related illnesses caused by years of legal battles against her fraudulent fines. Mrs. Patterson talked about the violation of privacy and security that came with knowing someone had targeted their family for criminal exploitation. A military family from another county testified about how Laura's harassment had triggered the husband's PTSD and nearly destroyed their marriage. Each testimony built toward the same conclusion. Laura Evans was a predator who had weaponized homeowner associations and community trust to destroy innocent families for personal profit. The judge's final sentence reflected both the severity of Laura's crimes and the community impact of her systematic fraud. 4 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised probation with restitution requirements totaling $112,000 to be paid to her victims. She was banned from holding any HOA position statewide and required to register as a housing fraud offender, ensuring that future communities would be warned about her criminal history. Most humiliatingly, she was ordered to write formal apology letters to each family she'd victimized. Letters that would be posted on the county's fraud prevention website as public warnings about HOA abuse tactics. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Laura's final words summed up everything wrong with her character. "Your Honor, I still believe I was trying to protect property values in my community." The community transformation that followed Laura's conviction was remarkable to witness and became a model for neighborhood recovery after systematic abuse. Property values in our neighborhood increased by 18% as word spread about our improved governance and zero tolerance for harassment. The Harris Protocol became a model for other communities dealing with IOA abuse, with local government officials citing our policies as examples of how resident protection should work. Marcus used his experience to establish a veteran family support network that now serves 12 neighborhoods, providing legal assistance and advocacy for military families facing housing discrimination or harassment. The program has prevented at least 6 similar fraud schemes from succeeding against veteran families across our county. The most personally satisfying outcome was watching our neighborhood develop into the kind of community Laura had always claimed to be protecting, but had actually been destroying through her systematic harassment campaigns. Without her divisive harassment and manufactured conflicts, neighbors actually started talking to each other and working together on genuine improvements. The community garden she'd blocked for 2 years finally got approval and became a gathering place where families build real relationships instead of living in fear of HOA retaliation. The veteran appreciation events that Marcus organized brought our community closer together while honoring the military families Laura had targeted for destruction. Children started playing together again without parents worrying about HOA complaints. And the atmosphere of suspicion and fear that Laura had cultivated was replaced by cooperation and mutual support. 2 years later, Laura's transformation from entitled HOA president to convicted felon working minimum wage retail became a cautionary tale that spread throughout our county and beyond. People would occasionally spot her bagging groceries at the discount store across town, wearing the kind of uniform she'd once looked down on when she was driving her expensive SUV and wielding HOA authority against families she considered beneath her station. The few neighbors who encountered her in public reported that she looked broken and defeated, stripped of the arrogance and entitlement that had defined her personality for so long. Her expensive clothes and professional styling were replaced by the appearance of someone who'd lost everything and was struggling to survive on wages she'd probably never imagined earning. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the way this experience strengthened the relationship between Marcus and me in ways that went far beyond normal father-son dynamics. Watching my son use his military training to protect our family and community gave me a pride that went beyond normal parental feelings. He'd come home from serving his country and immediately stepped up to serve his neighbors, using the same courage and intelligence that had made him an effective Marine to become a leader in civilian life. The boy I'd raised had become a man who could handle any challenge with honor and determination. And I realized that everything Linda and I had done to support his military career had been worth every sacrifice we'd made. The final chapter of Laura's story came when she completed her prison sentence and was released to begin her probation period under strict supervision that included regular check-ins with fraud prevention officers. Community members were notified of her release as part of the victim notification program, but by then she'd become irrelevant to our daily lives. We'd built something better in her absence, a neighborhood where people looked out for each other instead of looking for ways to exploit each other. The fear and division she'd created through manipulation and fraud had been replaced by trust and cooperation that made our community stronger than it had ever been under her supposed leadership. Mrs. Cooper, now in her 70s, became our informal neighborhood grandmother, organizing the social events and conflict resolution that kept our community connected and peaceful. Marcus used his GI Bill to complete a criminal justice degree and joined the district attorney's office as a victim advocate specializing in housing fraud cases that target vulnerable families. His experience with Laura's systematic abuse gave him unique insights into predatory behavior patterns that have helped protect dozens of other families from similar harassment campaigns. The skills he'd learned fighting one criminal HOA president now protect entire communities from housing fraud. As for me, I learned that asking for help doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. Having the humility to accept my son's protection and the community support taught me that strength comes from connection, not isolation. The house Linda and I had built together remained our family home. But it also became something more, a symbol of what's possible when good people stand together against those who would prey on others for personal gain. Every time I walk through the rooms where Laura had planted evidence to destroy us, I'm reminded that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about building something better from the ashes of what criminals try to destroy. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Laura Evans did us an unexpected favor. Her criminal targeting of our family brought out the best in our community and showed us what we were capable of when we worked together instead of living in fear. She thought she could destroy us with lies and manipulation. But instead she gave us the opportunity to build something better than what we'd had before her reign of terror began. That's how my Marine son showed Laura Evans who's really boss. Not through violence or intimidation, but through discipline, evidence, and the kind of integrity they teach you in the military. Laura learned that when you mess with one military family, you mess with everyone who believes in doing right. She thought she could use her master key to steal our home. Instead, she handed us the keys to destroy her completely. And that's a lesson that made our whole neighborhood stronger, safer, and better than it ever was before. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button. Your support helps us bring more real-life drama and justice stories to light. Thanks for watching The Silent Brave, and I'll see you in the next video where we dive into another unbelievable true story that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. Until then, keep standing up for what's right.